This is part 2 of our two-part video on descriptive feedback techniques for teachers and parents. Please be sure to watch part 1 first, as it will help with processing the content here in part 2. This video lists multiple techniques for descriptive feedback. Feel free to pause the video while watching it in order to understand the particular techniques a little better. Let's continue now with part 2. As we can, let's spend time asking students to compare their efforts to the given example. Place a successful version of what students need to do in front of them. Then ask them to write a letter or some form of expression to us describing these three elements. How does their product or performance match the example of excellence? How does it differ from the example of excellence? And what would they need to do in order for it to match? Alternatively, if children think their product or performance is of higher quality than the exemplar provided, ask them to make that case and prove it. This approach is really a riff on the most popular definition of descriptive feedback. 1. State the learning goal. 2. Describe where the student is in relation to that goal. And 3. Identify what needs to happen in order to close the gap between the two. 2 notes of caution here. First, if we make the example of excellence so far beyond a student's capacity to create, we push students away from investing in the feedback and assignment. It becomes easier for them just to give up, so don't be too perfect in your examples. Second, while it is true that analyzing one's position in relation to a preferred goal helps us achieve that goal, it is also true that sometimes we need to start a journey without a predetermined goal. Nor do we want to limit the next generation to what the current generation thinks is excellent. They should surpass us, which is a great thing. This kind of messy learning has led to many scientific discoveries, works of art, popular consumer products, and powerful writings across the years. A subset of this idea of not laying out a predetermined goal for students is to let them start with a tentative goal, but allow the goal to change as a result of new perspectives experienced while working towards the original goal. This is deeply valuable for creative endeavor. For example, children may be writing a wonderful compare and contrast essay, but in the midst of it, they decide to transcend convention and reflect on the power of a writer's voice to discern among subtleties or aesthetics while comparing. Or they may realize what they were preparing is much more evocatively presented as a graphic novel, a 2-act play, a new classification system, or an online role-playing game they designed themselves. As their teachers and parents, we consider, is this the moment to relinquish our imaginations for what could be? Do we limit our children's potential to an older generation's definition of success? Another great technique for descriptive feedback is here's what, so what, now what, based on John Driscoll's What model for structured reflection, 1994. Here's the sequence. Here's what. This just describes the cold facts without commentary or opinion, similar to the examples above. So what? The parent or teacher, or preferably the student, makes the connections and draws the larger conclusions. Examples include, so those are the adaptations cold-blooded animals have to make in order to live in the desert. Now we know that all these colors come from just these 3 primary colors. Or, using hundreds instead of thousands between each mark on the vertical axis avoids any misinterpretation of the data that might happen when using other increments. We're asking students here what the data feedback says to us, what patterns we perceive about the student's learning. Now what? Here is where is the place to identify next steps in the learning, new questions in the learning as well. Examples include, let's check your 2 other graphs to make sure the vertical and horizontal increments create an accurate portrayal of the data. Let's consider how we might portray the data if we were preparing the report for a different audience. What other ways could the data be visually portrayed so as not to distort conclusions drawn from the data? Or, If the data was displayed differently, such as a representative landscape, a radial plot, a mosaic, or a pie chart, would the data be more useful to its user? One thing to consider when providing helpful feedback: who is doing the learning or the thinking and thereby the learning? If we edit children's work ourselves, we learn a lot, but the child learns very little. So let's turn this around. Limit our editing of children's work. Let's get them to do it instead. They'll learn more, and once again, they'll take more responsibility for their learning. And even better, they won't make these same mistakes again. Here are 3 ideas for doing this. If you notice an error in a sentence or a math calculation, place a dot or a pair of cartoon eyeballs at the end or beginning of the sentence or near the portion of the math problem's calculations with the error, but don't identify what the issue is. The dot indicates that an error is present and needs to be corrected. If your child needs a hint, provide either an example without the error in it and ask him to compare the two, or offer minimal clues such as agreement, sum of the angles, coniferous trees, according to the subject. When using this method, you may want to do it with shorter chunks of the assignment, as the number of dots can add up and be overwhelming. For another variation on this idea, watch Highlighting Mistakes, a Grading Strategy on YouTube, in which pre-algebra teacher Leah Alcala simply highlights the errors in students' math work, but they have to figure out what's wrong and make corrections, talking through their thinking with their classmates. I've tried this. It works really well. For a third idea, try an item analysis chart with a letter of reflection. Really, it's a letter of action and analysis. This idea is based on the item analysis chart described in their book, Classroom Assessment for Student Learning, Doing It Right, Using It Well, 2007 and 2013, by Rick Stiggins, Jan Chapuis, Steve Chapuis, Judy Arter, and others at Assessment Training Institute. Once a test is graded or a practice assignment has been marked or received comments, the student collects the assessment back from the parent, teacher, or classmate and completes an item analysis chart about his performance on that assessment. This is just data collection, so it's a chart of that data, or it's a graphic organizer in which students record indicators of their learning or lack thereof. A great thing here is that we can adjust the prompts on the chart based on which elements we feel our children need the most focus. We, or our students, depending on the situation, identify what we want students to analyze in the assessment, and those topics become the headers at the top of each column in the chart. Here's an example chart used for a quiz when upper elementary students couldn't perceive between being careless in their mistakes and then those mistakes that were made because they just really did not understand the mathematics required. Notice that the students fill out the chart, not the parent or teacher. Otherwise, it's a passive, less effective experience. If the child prefers to use smiley or frowny faces, or the colors of the traffic light, green, yellow, red, to indicate understanding, that's fine. Again, you can put whatever you want at the top, including if you want them to have reminders of what they should have been doing all along to kind of think more reflectively about their learning. Once finished, the child uses the assessment and this chart to write a letter to the parent or teacher, including 3 basic parts as we see here. So you've got the date, you've got the salutation greeting at the beginning, and then, I understand, I need assistance or help in, I suggest the following 4 steps that I need to take in order to learn this content and skill properly. And then, of course, there's a place to sign off for the child and the teacher. And the teacher reserves the right to revise or augment if they think they can improve upon the plan. Of course, many of our students may not have any idea about how to study content effectively. So we may need to brainstorm possible activities and strategies that they can use to study that content on their own or with a partner. We ask them to draw from these menus of options as they complete this third portion of the letter, but at least they are making the choice themselves, rather than following a list of second-party directives. Understand that they will own it. They will not make excuses, and they'll mature in that process. One final way to help the student monitor learning and invest in their own education is the old standby used in classrooms around the globe. I used to think, insert old perceptions of a particular topic of learning here, but now I think, insert observations, insights about how those perceptions have now changed as a result of learning. Well, gosh, let's try that right now. Here are 3. I used to think descriptive feedback didn't matter that much in children's learning, but now I see it's more essential and helpful than grades are. Here's another. I used to think descriptive feedback was only done by teachers, but now I see parents and students can do it just as effectively. And finally, I used to think I couldn't do descriptive feedback, but now I have the tools to do it well. Parents and teachers, thank you for hanging in there with your children and their schooling during this challenging time. Your families and communities are worth it, even if it's unusually tough. You have a lot of us educators willing to help. Just ask. If you'd like to give me feedback or converse further about assessment, descriptive feedback techniques, and grading, remember, you can reach me at rick@rickwormeli.onmicrosoft.com. Portions of this content come from my book, Fair Isn't Always Equal, 2nd edition, published by Stenhouse Publishers. If you'd like to learn more about assessment, grading, feedback, differentiation, and more, the book is available at www.stenhouse.com and, of course, at Amazon and Barnes & Noble bookstores. Thanks for all you do for the next generation.